Hello and welcome to the Sociology Staffroom. We've got Duncan again with us. Well, hey!
Hello, it's nice to be back and not to be behind the controls today.
I know he's actually always with us, in more ways than one. Either obviously the controls or working on tutor stuff for us. But we've I've got you on here today, Duncan, is to pick your brains about the next sort of, I don't know what it is. How long have we got to the exams? We're going to be talking about exams, basically in
Well,
preparation for that.
I mean, obviously, we don't know exactly when this is going out, but assuming we're sort of end of April, is that roughly where we are?
Yeah.
Then we've got a few weeks. Literally a few weeks till the first exam, and a little longer till the last exam. And obviously, some schools might the kids might go before that, so might really have very little time left with them. Some might teach right up to the exam, so it's an interesting time. It's always feels like the sharp end, doesn't it? Of you've done it for 2 years and then suddenly it's all down to this last couple of weeks. And, yeah,
Yeah, so not really long, as you said. Like you've got
not
students
at all.
obviously potentially going earlier, and then you've also got potentially, students still in for maybe revision classes and such right up to the
Yeah.
exams, and then they might go depending on what exam board you're with or whatever. But maybe you might stay for May half term. So assuming we've still got, like, I know I will keep we keep our students
Hmm.
right up to sort of roughly sort of May half term, as a lot of schools do. I know that some might go a little bit earlier, but
Hmm.
assuming that, what would you? I mean, I know you're not. You are potentially the oracle of sociology for some, but you aren't the oracle for sociology.
No.
But how best should we be using our time? Say if we've got sort of, say we've got 3 weeks roughly left, approximately, give or take. How do you think we should be using this time?
Yeah, it's. I think it's quite tricky how best to use this time off. That's good. The sun's gone in a little bit. Sorry, those watching on the video will know I was like very, very the glare of the sun just then. It might come back. Um, Sorry. I think it's quite tricky to know how best to use this time. I think obviously different people might be in slightly different positions. So hopefully, and I think you might ask about this later, but hopefully you finish the content. We've already spent a bit of time kind of more on revision type sessions, but some of the stuff we tend to leave till the end, or a lot of people leave towards the end, is quite tricky, and students struggle conceptually with some of that sort of year 13 theory and debate stuff. So it might be that you're still having to kind of reiterate some of that, or perhaps make sure students have understood that. But then you have to kind of balance that with, well, that might be 20 marks out of 400 or whatever, and so we need to kind of make sure they know they know the other stuff. So that, I mean, I think it's quite challenging. I think it's a good time to do plenty of kind of knowledge retrieval type stuff. Hopefully you've spent lots of time on the skills. I will talk about that again in a second, because I think you still need to make sure they're thinking about what they'll actually have to do with this in the exam. But I think it's a good time for kind of quizzes, fast paced activities, but stuff that's quite fun to do as well. So that's always quite nice. You know, checking what they know rather than you going over it again. I think that for the most part is what you do. The kind of red, amber, green type things. Get a nice list of the content. How confident do you feel with that? I mean, obviously the worry then is that they send you back one that's all red and amber, and then it's like, well, you got
Well, that's
two
what I
or
was going
three.
to ask you. What do you do then? If they're turning around and saying,
I don't know
I
this stuff.
actually, I don't know this stuff, but they're doing retrieval when you're like, oh my goodness, we did, I don't know,
Yeah,
education the first term or whatever into year
yeah, they've
12, and they're
forgotten it.
like, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, obviously the benefit of doing that sort of activity, both the retrieval activities and the sort of rag rating type thing, is identifying the gaps. Obviously, the problem is if there's more gaps than not, and then it is quite hard at that stage, because it's like, well, we can't particularly narrow it down. We can't say focus on this, because we don't know what the questions are going to be. I don't recommend trying to predict what the questions are going to be based on what's gone before or anything like that. I think that's always a risk. If you say, oh well, don't do this, focus on that, I think then there's if that ends up being the question that you've told them not to focus on, then you've not served the kids well in that situation. So I do think it's a tricky challenge. I think you identify the gaps, and you say that's where they should focus their research, their revision in the last period. But obviously, if it's the whole course, then hopefully it won't be. That's hopefully we're at this stage, and it's not that. And hopefully perhaps we've done a bit of this already, so we've already been identifying the gaps prior to the last 2 or 3 weeks. But yes, if it's everything, then they're going to have a busy few weeks. And the problem, of course, is that they've got their other subjects as well, some of which they may feel less confident with. And so you might be saying, oh, well, you need to spend a good lot of time on, I don't know, theories of education, because that's come up as a gap. And they might be thinking, well, I've got to spend a lot more time on, some aspect of, biology or something, because, I'm further behind on that, and I need to get a higher grade on that, or whatever. They've got all these other pressures on their time, and indeed some exams that might come sooner. They might have 1 or 2 exams before sociology. That's the other thing at this point is, do you focus on paper 1? Because that's the one that's coming up, or do you think, well, I'm not going to get much time with them between paper 1 and paper 2 and paper 3, so we have to look at all of it. So there's all these things to consider. The students are quite likely to, at this point, to be thinking largely about paper 1. They're probably getting to the point where they're thinking about it exam by exam rather than holistically. But I think to a certain extent you have to keep them on the other 2 as well, because as I was saying, you might not see them between, or might get to do a revision session for each one or something like that. But it's it's a tricky time. I think it's a tricky time.
I was going to say to you, I know I've seen, in different schools we ask them to do different things, because it's either motivated by the teachers themselves doing it, or by the schools. But I know they do sort of. I'm thinking something I've done. I'm hearing this rustling. I'm thinking, I need to start playing the spoons, Duncan.
Sorry, was I was moving some keys or something?
I was thinking, the spoons. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm good with that. But yeah, I was thinking, they do 30-day plans, or what you're going to do every day.
Yeah.
So that you sort of think, rather than students thinking to themselves, oh my goodness, I've got education to do. I think, right, on day 1, I'm just going to look at names to talk about class and education. Day 2, I'm going to look at and then day 3, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And we that?
I was going to say, Tutor to You, we produced something along those lines, didn't we? We produced a revision plan. And obviously, kind of, we're past a lot of that now. That was from a good few weeks back. I think it's everyone's different, and everyone works differently, and as I mentioned before, you've got the problem of balancing other subjects and the requirements of other subjects. But I think in general, it's good to have a plan, and to organise it, because there is a problem that you either focus on the stuff that you like, because that's the sort of typical thing for students to do, is I'll spend ages on the stuff that I quite like, and then keep putting off the stuff that you're less keen on, or indeed you just focus on the stuff that you really struggle with, and those questions don't come up, or whatever, and so it would be. Sorry, I'm being absolutely glared by the sun now. Those questions might not come up, and you've not spent the time on the other stuff that you felt reasonably confident with, but you could have excelled at it if you've managed to devote some time to that. So I think having a systematic, organised plan is quite a good idea, but I think it needs to be reasonably flexible, and I think you need to be able to think, well, each student's different. Some students don't need to spend next Wednesday thinking about names in education because they know them, so they'd be better off focusing on something else, and so that I think students need to have that flexibility. But generally, I think it's a good idea, and possibly at this stage, even better idea. You've got this really limited time. Maybe having a clear plan what you want to do with it is it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. So I was thinking this, as you were talking, I was thinking, one of the things I've done in the past with students, and I still actually do, is I do create a survey there's lots of providers of different surveys out there that you can make autonomous. But like basically get the students anonymously. Literally disappearing, Duncan. The sun.
I could probably get away with having a sip of my cup of tea because he can't see me.
Does it say I missed a call on there?
I believe it does, yeah.
But basically, I was thinking like maybe a good thing, because obviously we've got, you know, coming up, we've got the holidays at the moment. Obviously you've got May. Obviously you've got that sort of period of time. Obviously going out sort of end of April, where I'm thinking to myself, sort of, it might be a good idea. I know that it's worked for me, is doing a survey with students, and then sort of, because it's anonymous, the students are more likely to be honest with you, hopefully, of things they know and they don't know. And I've often found it's useful to plan my revision plan around that. Sort of, this is what the students, and then there's a bit of a reason of why I've prioritised those things over other things. And it's a mixture of skills as well, so it's not just knowledge and topics, it's also skills. Have you heard of a teacher doing that before, or have you used that before?
Yeah, I mean, I think I said right at the start that this is a good opportunity for focusing on the knowledge, but you want to make sure the students are never make it just about the knowledge. And I think you can see that in the answers sometimes, that students have learnt a lot of stuff in the weeks leading up to the exam. At this point, they've learnt a lot of names, they've learnt a lot of content, and very much under certain headings. And so if they get a question on a particular topic, they list the stuff that's kind of under that heading in their mind, and it could be quite good AO1 type stuff. But I think right up to the end, it's important for the students to focus on the fact that it's not really just about remembering sociological content, and actually it's much more about answering those questions. And so if you can practice the skills in revision, I think that's really good. And so when you're looking at the sort of activities that you get them to do, or that you do with them, I think ones that involve some of those higher order thinking skills remain the best ones to use right up to the end, rather than just how many names can you remember, how many. I like you had an activity called like power lists or something, didn't you? And I like that one, but but you don't want their answers to be power lists. So as well as doing those sorts of activities where it's like list as many sociologists who wrote about this as possible or whatever, you want that kind of thing. Well, what did they say, and how does that one disagree with that one, or how do they agree, and things like that. So again, it can still be quite engaging, quick activities. It might be sorting activities, or that sort of thing, but something where they're doing something with the knowledge, rather than just that comes under that heading.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's so important. I think sometimes we worry about the knowledge because we think, well, if they don't have the knowledge, they're not going to be able to understand, to do the skills bit. Yeah, and they do go hand in hand. And I suppose just remembering those skills. Just a sort of final sort of thinking question to ask you: what if, okay? And we know, like, if. I say it with a big if, because hopefully, this is not about stigmatising people. We're all in different situations. Different schools are run up differently in the sense that their kids might have been taken out for a school trip. We've also still got the backlog of what was COVID 2000, like the year 12s going into year 12s when COVID was still on. Although I can't even remember it. It feels like it's gone out of my head as a thing. But people still had to isolate, right? Christmas that year, there was still like rules around not coming into school and stuff. So there's still that relative backlog. It did all go back to normal really until
I think year 12. Year 12's even had some period of lockdown, didn't they? I think. I'm confused now. Maybe not. I was thinking around Christmas time, not the Christmas just gone, but the one before. They might have. Anyway, there were certainly times when kids couldn't go into school and things. Yeah,
definitely. I think if they're thinking about them, the year 13s now that were in year 12s, they definitely weren't allowed to go in school if they had COVID. That's still a rule. So obviously, potentially, we might not be where we are in the spec for lots of different reasons. World. In an ideal world, okay.
And teachers having time off as well for the same,
for
related reasons.
Because I did. I remember now. I'm like, it's all coming back to me. It's like COVID, pre-COVID, during COVID. Yeah. I had like the February off, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm off. And then. And then the students were off or beforehand, so basically we all just came to know the COVID probably in that period. I'm thinking back, there was just that period. And obviously Christmas was the same. So then my sort of question around that is, what do we do if we have still not covered bits on the
Yeah,
spec?
yeah.
What would you do? Because I know there's going to be teachers out there like, you're talking
Yeah.
about revision.
Yeah,
We're not even
we
at
haven't
that.
finished.
We haven't finished yet. What
Yeah.
do we do?
Well, I think it's tricky. I think you have to finish. I think you need to look at what you've got left. And I'm sure people will have been doing this at an earlier point, thinking, well, what am I leaving till last? And if there's a risk that it might not get done. But I think, it could, we don't know what the 20 mark theory and methods question on the paper 3 will be, but it could be, is sociology a science? Should sociology be value free? Should sociology advise social policy? And you don't want kids to be going in there thinking, I've never heard of any of this, I've never done this. So you have to finish. Obviously that might not be what people are doing last, but just assuming for a moment that it is. But you don't want the students not to have had any revision time. So it's a difficult balancing act. I think, one thing I'd say would be to go back to a conversation we had previously where I was talking to you about flipped learning, because I think you could flip some of, depending on what you've got left, you could flip it and get them to do it. And it might seem odd to think, let's use the lesson time for revision and get them to learn the content at home. That seems like, might seem sort of, counterintuitive. But you want to do some revision with them, I think. You want to get them doing some of this, what can remember, because especially if you're running out of time, you probably haven't spent a lot of time going back over year 12 content if you haven't managed to finish the year 13 content. And so a bit of time on that, it's a long time ago for some of them, so helping them with some retrieval stuff and some skill stuff, I think is still important. So maybe saying, well, let's take a couple of these topics and you're going to look at those at home and then we'll test them somehow in the class as part of our revision. We'll include revision activities on those. But having said that, if you have left sociology and science and value freedom and things like that, post-modernity till last, they are topics that probably students would benefit from some, expert input to go back to our previous discussion. But that they're quite conceptually quite difficult, and so you can read a passage in a book, you could read a thing, you could do some activities and still not really understand it. And I think you do want to make sure that students do understand those concepts and you've explained it to them. And I think actually mainly because they can seem more complicated than they need be sometimes when you're just reading it, and I think it's more kind of decoding it perhaps that teachers can help with in that, because particularly like the postmodern stuff is written in a very sort of abstract, convoluted way. I personally think a lot of postmodernism is sort of making actually quite simple, almost commonsensical points seem much more sophisticated than they really are. But
it's funny because you say that. I was listening to a comedy about, not about postmodernity, that would be strange, but they actually were talking about postmodernity, like as an idea, and I was applying it to that. So I was like, that's basically postmodernity. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to keep the sun out now. It's just ridiculous.
Where are you? I mean, it's like
I know. I'm in the Caribbean or something. Well, you wouldn't think I was in the Yorkshire Dales and it was forecast to rain today. So...
I mean, it's raining down here, raining down south.
It's nice and sunny out there today. Too sunny.
So basically, it's getting that stuff taught, particularly the stuff that's really like conceptual.
Yeah, I think
but then allow time to revise.
Yeah, so I mean that's it's easy to say, isn't it? It's much harder to do. I mean, maybe see whether they can, and this is whether you're able to do this in your time as well as whether the students have time to do this. So this isn't like kind of you must do this. Just one possibility is trying to get them for a couple of extra sessions if they're if they are behind. Whether you could, I mean we're a bit late now for the advice of an Easter session because we need to have given that advice a couple of weeks ago, but maybe seeing whether you could get them in at another time, so that you've got time to do both. I mean, obviously, it depends how much hasn't been delivered and what it is, in terms of quite how you'd deal with it. Obviously, booklets and things can help as well. I'm do a little plug bit, but something like the exam skills workbooks from Tutor to You, or the exam practice book for theory and methods, and methods in context. They could be ways of getting students not just thinking about the knowledge, but thinking about the skills on those topics that perhaps they haven't spent as much time on. Actually, also, if you haven't had a chance to go over year 12 stuff, I think they're great for that, actually. If you could get, just fill in the education and families or whatever topic it is that you've done exam skills workbooks, you've revisited year 12 out of class time. So I think that's something to consider too. Possibly for future years, it might be a bit late to sort that out before this exam, but I think that's something to consider. Yeah.
So a couple of things there, and I think another thing is probably, if it is real, I mean, this is just like a thing on sort of, I'm doing this because I'm like thinking, as I say it, is if it is a sort of serious thing, if you are really behind, I suppose the important thing is that you communicate with that with your whether it's a team leader or head of faculty and stuff, because ultimately they can make space within, like, say if you're a lone person, just thinking from the other side of it, and that you are the sole teacher within sociology, for argument's sake, we're not working with a team, but you're maybe 2-3 weeks behind. Communicate that to your, and I know it's an awful thing to do, to knock on that door and say that, but actually what a school can do is potentially, obviously different schools are different, is they can move things in the school, in the school day, potentially for that. So don't suffer in silence. I think that's what I was going to say. And
I think
that actually, is a bigger thing.
Yeah, I think when I said, you might be able to put on other sessions for them and stuff, I mean, the only way you could do that is by having communicated and everyone acknowledging that there's a problem there. And I appreciate people might, be very reluctant to say things because they don't want, it to be seen in a negative light on them. But we do, I think, everyone's aware that there's been, we're still kind of catching up and getting back to something approaching normal. Often people will be, managers and things will be aware that there've been issues if you're a long way off. If it's just that, basically you're going to use all the time, I think that's probably quite normal, and that's the other thing to think about is, if you're still teaching, after Easter, I don't think that's unusual. I think a lot of people have still got some content to go at that point. And it's, it's a tricky one. And I think we mentioned this on a previous discussion that, you could have consciously decided to do it that way. And, that revision was something that you're going to start much earlier and be a constant thread throughout, rather than leaving time at the end for revision, and not to feel that you've done it wrong necessarily if you've decided to.
There's lots of different methods, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, I always tended to leave some time at the end, but I occasionally sort of wondered whether it was the right thing to do, because sometimes those you'll do sort of revision sessions towards the end, and you can sort of think, well, was that the most valuable use of the timetable time that we've got? Is that the sort of thing they could have done themselves at home, and we could have spent that lesson on more of the content? Similarly, you can flip that around and say, well, the content's better done at home. So there's lots of ways to do this, and I don't think anyone on a podcast or whatever will sort of come up with the magic bullet that's the best way for everyone to do it, and that's the only way that works by any means.
Oh, definitely. I think that's the point. I think that's why it's good to have these discussions, because actually,
what do you do, Kate? Just out of interest, what do you do? So, how do you?
What with regards to revision?
Yeah, the last few weeks. What do you?
So I mean, everyone does it again. do things differently. I actually bring in some of the sort of the debates quite early on in year 12. So I actually bring consensus versus conflict, structure versus action. Structuration I don't, although I do sort of go, there is structuration. I just sort of don't overwhelm them in the first lesson. As a teaser. I talk about it and go, obviously, with everything, there's a middle ground and everything's great with it. So even with consensus conflict, it's not as divisive of that, and the same with the structuration theory. So I sort of bring those early in. Obviously, socialisation is something I bring in all the way through. So, and then even when I'm talking about methods, when I teach methods, I bring the sociology science debate in there. When I bring in like positivism, interpretivism. Yes. Yeah. So basically, when I actually teach that, that's actually quite relatively quite short.
Some of it's revision anyway. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, the only things that I probably have to sort of outrightly teach would probably be like policies one. I thought that needs to be taught. Although we've talked about it, I don't think they've consciously made that link. And then same with the
that's an interesting one, isn't it? You know, again, it's not for the last 3 weeks, it's for thinking about designing it in the future. But we talk about policies a lot throughout the course. I mean, maybe there's something to be said for when you do introduce policies earlier, making a link to theory and whether sociology should be advising policy and that kind of thing. Just out of interest.
I mean, I did that for the first time this year because I think I told you we talk about sociology outside the podcast. Is I printed off because obviously one of the political ideologies, and I just thought, you know, I printed off the political ideologies, the parties over time, and then we plotted the policies against them, and then I just sort of thought it was just it felt natural in that lesson, just because this year we had quite a high cohort of politics students. So then I brought in the sociological ideologies that matched that, and I appreciate it was lost potentially on some students because they weren't there, but also some students were. But again, when we do teach, I feel like there's that backdrop to that. So I think like there's quite nice opportunities to bring that in. As regards to revision, I actually really, and I don't know, again, because I've spoken about this before around flipped learning, I actually start revision roughly, give or take, because schools' years are different and stuff like that, from after February half term onwards, which sounds like a really long time.
Yeah.
But I think I've spoken about this before, I do sort of mixture of flipped learning and spiral learning, those are buzzwords, but basically I teach relatively synoptically, and then it all sort of it's all spun around again. It's not reteaching, it's sort of trying to make those synoptic links where possible. So students probably aren't so secure in their knowledge as much as maybe people who teach it in detail, but then I sort of go through that again from March, April. But I don't, and again, it's just the way I do it. Maybe because that's how my brain thinks about sociology. So but
well, I think it's good that it illustrates that there's lots of different ways of doing it. So presumably by kind of the last few weeks, you know, you've been doing revision sessions for a couple of months.
Which can be the opposite. The students are like, oh, this is really like boring now.
Not another revision lesson. Can't you teach us something?
Basically.
But what I mean, just out of interest, like say it's the lesson before the exam, what would you do in that lesson? Sorry, I know this is meant to be you asking me, but I'm flipping it round. We're doing flipped interview.
Flipped interview. So basically, I have a schedule. Like I do a schedule. I do like it's called a master plan, a 60-day master plan of what we're going to do every lesson. And so basically, I start generally with knowledge stuff at the beginning, and where I'm sort of mixing things together, particularly like policies go across and names and stuff. And then I work. Then it's just skills, so it looks like 10 markers, evaluation. And then at the end, I sort of go back to comfort zone stuff. So stuff like the last lesson before, I'm not looking at anything too taxing. It's more of a fun, like light lesson. So it might just be a quiz or a game activity, something quite light.
I think that's another good point. Sorry, I'll just develop that, is that just before the exams, you don't want to be freaking them out, do you? So you don't want to be kind of, actually, there's this thing called structuration or whatever, like in May, because you want them to feel confident as far as possible. You want them to be going into the exams feeling confident that they do know it, that they have learnt it. You want them to be aware of where they need to work and where they've got gaps, but you don't want them to be despairing. And there is a risk sometimes that that well-meaning, you really need to know this stuff at the end can be like, oh, well, I don't know that, so it's a problem.
Yeah, so more normally my last lessons are like a bit of a quiz, we bring in some cake,
Yeah.
it's that sort of like lesson.
Yeah.
It's not actually a teachy lesson, last couple of lessons. And that for that reason. And then what I do is during the exam period, generally, because some school, they go on generally study leave, between exams, I then put sort of sessions on that I know are quite sort of, I suppose, would be the trickiest stuff that people want to come in, like voluntary. It's like a sort of like a sort of session on that. But
and just say if you want to do a session on
postmodernism
or whatever we're doing it.
We're doing it then, or policies or something like that. But that's how I use it. I was going to say to you, I know we're doing some stuff. I know, like, you're not only are you looking very light and bright, you also are very energised, considering you've been on how many weeks have you been away for now? I've just
it feels like quite a few. So I mean, by the time this goes out, we're nearly at the end of the Grey Booster tour, but there'll be a couple of sessions left in London. I think one or two sessions left in London. If
so May the
people
2nd,
hear this,
like
something like that, first week of May. So if people listen to this and think still want to bring their students out to a Grey Booster workshop, hopefully there'll be a few places left in London. But after that, and obviously you'll be part of this, Katie, as well. We'll get back to live streaming in earnest, and I assume we'll probably stick with our usual Wednesday evening slot. It tends to work quite nicely, and we'll basically live stream up to the exams now, which again is not a lot of sessions, but we'll do some general revision ones, and then right before the exams we'll do some kind of clinic type things we did last year. They were quite popular. Just ask us anything. A day or two before the exam, and some of those had sort of thousands of students on it. And again, a bit like you were saying about not necessarily wanting to sort of scare the students before them. The ask us anything thing obviously there's a slight risk there that people might ask questions that other students watching think, well, I didn't even know about that question, let alone the answer to it. And I think there does have to be an element of reassurance at this point, as well as reinforcing and plugging gaps. I think, and I'm probably the biggest one, I would say, particularly if students are looking at revision materials outside your classroom, so ours, for example, or whatever else there is out there, that they're likely to see names and studies that you've not covered with them, and that doesn't matter, and for them not to panic about that and think, well, I don't know who wrote about religion online or whatever, or anything like that. You'll have covered something else with them that makes similar points, or so, and I think that sort of regular reassurance that just because another, come to the Grey Boosters and they'll hear students answering some questions saying, oh, well, that relates to, Misha Glennie or something, and then other people might say, well, I don't know who that is. And that, we do need to sort of reiterate that that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. Different textbooks have different people in, different teachers teach different studies. It's not like psychology where it's all really prescriptive. No. Thank goodness.
I think you might edit that one out, Duncan. Are you keeping that in?
I'll keep it in.
Keep it in.
Yeah.
I just want to say, before more people we're going, another really good simple thing to do, and I know it's like a really obvious thing, but I quite like a quick walking, talking, walk, as in like just looking through the paper.
Yeah, walking through a question.
Just very, or just even just like flicking through the paper, going right. Just remember, you open the paper, you got a 4 marker, you got a 6 marker, and going through that. Just sort of think it's just nice. It's almost like, it reminds me of if your kid's going to secondary school and you're just doing the walk before, they walk into school on their own. This is where my analogy is like, and you're practicing the walk before. They know how to walk to school, but I think it just gives them that comfort. Like, remember on the options paper, you're going to have all these other things. You're doing this one.
That's a really important one. I was just going to say, that's a really important one. If, say, they do families, for example, which 90% of them do, they need to know that the first question on the paper they are not answering. Yeah, on paper 2, they need to flick through because so many, in the sort of heat of the moment and the stress of the exam, or whatever, will just question 1, and have a go at it. And quite often it takes a little bit of time through, say, a culture and identity question to realise that perhaps that isn't their question, because it often, it might be something about socialisation or something like that, which they have covered. It's, because of the synoptic nature of sociology. They don't always notice that until they turn the page over again and then it says families, households, that they've made a mistake. And you'll get somebody try and answer every question on the paper.
I think that's really important, definitely.
Yeah, so,
I think that's a quite simple activity, but I think it is, and it just reminds about times and how long you've got, and it's all like quite low key stuff, but I think that's really, really helpful.
But it's so it's entirely possible for them to get right to the exam never having seen an actual paper. Obviously, you'll put papers together, you'll give them mocks and things, but that thing of actually seeing what will the actual paper look like. Do I write on the paper? Do I write in a separate book? Do I have to turn pages? All of that stuff, it seems really obvious, but actually it's that kind of last minute thing that they would benefit. How long have they actually got? all that sort of thing, is worth going over at the end.
And definitely, because obviously the options paper hasn't got a line paper where you don't write, whereas obviously paper 1 and paper 3 do. And obviously even just asking that you can ask for more paper, that's not all those sort of things. You've got to remember these students, they would have had would they
some
have
of these ones haven't done exams, I don't think.
Because I think so again, all these things we think are normal, they've not really had. I think they do tags. I can't remember. I'm sort of again pre-postcode dude. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I think they did for their GCSEs as well. So these things like bring a pen and don't talk during the exam. Things that we would think would just be so obvious for an A-level student. You might need to remind them.
Yeah, certain things like that. Yeah, definitely.
I don't know. Last formal exams would have been SATs, would it?
Potentially, yeah, I think so.
For some of them.
I think so, yeah. Because obviously they would have had practice ones, but they're not quite the same. And obviously, like you said, teachers sort of make a hash of ones that different ones that they've made before.
Bring some papers together.
Yeah. Oh,
and that might just be in the classroom rather than in a an exam hall or whatever. It's a different environment, different experience, isn't it? Fun.
Definitely.
Yeah. Hopefully a lot of the key stuff they'll be told by the invigilator on the day, and things like don't start talking when you're finished, and all that kind of thing, and stop writing when we say, and all that kind of thing. But it is worth them hearing it from their sociology teacher too. I should think.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Right.
Well, I think we're going to go. I think that's it. Yeah. I think but if they've honestly, at the end of the day, I'm sure they're, going to be good. And I think, it's been a sort of a weird couple of years, but we're nearly there. So yeah, I think, I think we're on that last furlong, and then it's like, yay, summer holidays. There's always the summer holidays up there for you, Duncan, by the looks of it, with all that sunshine. So
I know, yeah. So just my final thoughts on it would be, plug gaps but reassure. I think that's the balancing act you've got to try and do. Try and make sure that you've plugged any gaps they've got, but that you don't make them think, I can't do this at all, because it's all gaps. So you got to somehow balance that problem. But I'm sure
in capable hands.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you ever so much for your time, Duncan. And
cheers,
I'll
Katie.
let you go out sunbathing now, aren't you, Duncan?
Well, possibly. It'll rain the second we finish this, but looking for a rainbow now. All right. Okay.
All right, take care. Bye.
See ya. Bye.